Hey, welcome to another week of the Aaron Running podcast. And today we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite topic, and that's going to be politics. um, and I know people don't like to talk about that, especially in this election season. Um, there's enough Facebook fights going on in the comments and whatnot, or on Twitter. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about that. And I am not as informed as I would want to be. So I'm actually bringing on a friend to help me with this conversation. And that is going to be my good friend, Brian Hampel, all the way from the beautiful state of Tennessee. And yeah, if you remember, Brian actually came on pretty early on in the podcast to talk about why he moved out of California to Tennessee. And here he is again. So, what's up, man?
Hey, Aaron, good to see you, brother. Yeah, we're coming to you from the free states of America. Welcome anytime.
Yeah, and I noticed you got the killer, stash now.
I was gonna compliment you on the mustache, man. It's looking good. I came out here and a lot of my friends had mustaches, and for my job, we're not allowed to have facial hair, but we're allowed to have mustaches. And so I was like, you know what? I had to get rid of my goatee. I'll just give it a try. I told my wife Cassie at the very beginning. I said, this thing's gonna look ridiculous. This is gonna be the equivalent of Joe Dirt growing a mustache. Like it's gonna be horrible. And it ended up being a little better than I thought. It's the weirdest thing. I have random guys at least once a day will stop me and say the words glorious stash bro at least once a day, if not more than that. So yeah,
It's
weird
pretty
tangent, but there
glorious,
it is.
dude. Are you using any kind of, like, wax in there or any kind of, like, oil?
You're putting me on the spot here, Aaron. I do have a brush because it gets a little out of control. And then we went to a Bigfoot festival. Yeah, you heard that right. A actual full-on Bigfoot festival they have over here uh, near the Rockies, and there were some dudes there selling like beard oil, and I found one that smelled pretty good. So yeah, I try to keep it, a little oiled up in there, keep
Alright,
it
yeah, hey,
glistening.
no judgment here. I use some oil too, so you got to. So
Yeah.
how's, Knoxville, Tennessee? Well, it's like Maryville, right? Or around there?
Yeah. Yep, we live in Maryville, and it's good, man. I've tried to become a little bit more involved. I just started going to a group called East Tennessee Conservatives, and it's a lot of conservatives and Eastern Tennessee, kind of coming from Blount County and the surrounding areas. A lot of evangelical presence there, which is really neat. I know there's a big push to get the church more involved, or at least teaching people how to become a little bit more biblical citizens. Kind of, how do we as Christians operate in a political environment? Should we engage in politics? Kind of how that looks, because I think for a long time, Christian, the idea of keeping your religion out of politics has caused a lot of the problems that we're in now. Is that Christians felt like, okay, so the rules of the game are we keep our faith and our religion out of our politics, out of government entities, out of government institutions. Well, while we may have actually been pretty good at adhering to that, the other side, the more secular religion, the humanist religion, they weren't keeping their side of the bargain. So they were infusing their beliefs into the system while we were tempering ours back. And so 40, 50 years later, now we start to see the lopsided results of people, keeping their faith, trying to separate those two things. And now I think we're at an impasse, or at least we're at a place in the church and really in our hearts too, like us as individuals. It would be easy to condemn the American church, capital A, capital C, but really when it comes down to is these little personal battles that we have, is that, um, have I intentionally censored my faith when it comes to politics? Have I kept my mouth shut about certain hot button topics because I thought that um, it would ill represent my faith? And so I've kept my mouth shut whenever, even though my stomach felt compelled to speak up, things like that. So um, I've tried to become a little bit more involved, because that was one of the things that my wife Cass and I talked about. Is once we left California, is I wanted to be a uh, kind of a warning. Like I liken it to people escaping former Soviet blocs, people escaping Cuba going, hey, you know what? I've seen these policies that you are advocating for play out, and I've seen them play out to their logical end. And that's why there's such a mass exodus. So let me be your warning signal. Let me be your yellow flashing light, your red flashing light going, hey, I know this idea sounds good. It's a bad idea because of X, Y, and Z. So I've tried to become just a little bit more involved. And what that looks like really now is like so just attending some meetings and just kind of seeing what's what. But yeah, so it was kind of a long conversation, answer to how's East Tennessee.
No, it's good. I mean, I'm still here in the communist state of California, so, you know, hopefully one day get the escape going, escape on a raft or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. No, I did just hear some interesting things coming out of my old, home state, which was them getting ready to issue $150,000 uh, tax credits, I guess, incentives to illegal aliens for home, buying a home. And that's one of the, people that don't understand that if they don't think that that's just going to make home prices $150,000 more expensive, like then you got another thing coming, right? But that's it's just such an insult to Californians, to Americans, who are busting their humps trying to make a living. A lot of people out there, in mid 20s, early 30s, late 30s, that are trying to buy their home for the first time that just can't do it on what they're making up there, and then just to have $150,000 handed off to someone who cut the line and is there illegally, it's a slap in the face. It's absolutely horrible. And then the other thing I read, and feel free to Google this one, was one of the highest economic commissions in California has floated the idea of actually buying um, the the oil production so that they can kind of take control and try to keep prices down because the oil prices are so outrageous. But when you kind of boil it back and say this, okay, so they're taking the means of production, it's like, oh, I've heard that before. Take seizing the means of production is that's communism 101. I mean, that's the first thing like socialist, you know, dictators do. And like I've said for a long time, as long as as long as you have the current politics the way they are in California, it's not going to get any better. It will only get worse because they only know one thing. They only know tax, they only know power, they only know control. It's going to go the way of Venezuela. It's not going to get any better. That ratchet strap only goes one way. And so, I always warn my friends, say it's not getting any better, man.
Yeah, take it from someone who would love to buy a home, but I'm unable to right now,
Mhm.
just on the current prices and what we're making, and yeah, just I was very upset reading that headline. I think yesterday that said that illegal immigrants would have just a free pass to basically do that. And as someone who's obeyed the law their whole life, worked hard the whole life, it's yeah, it's definitely a slap in the face. So very
Yeah,
upsetting.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, man. So just getting into our topic a little bit today. So I've kind of done some posting online about just politics and the current election season, and that always gets everybody a little heated, especially with some friends here in California. But
Yeah.
right now, I just want to ask, what do you think about our two main candidates? Because it looks like it's basically going to come down between Trump and Kamala, right? Like, I know there's going to be
Yeah.
other, third party candidates and whatnot, but those are our two basic options right there.
So the third party candidate of real consequence, RFK Jr. He just dropped out and he's throwing his full support behind Donald Trump, which I think is it's fantastic. Because really the way I see it is that the entire election is going to come down to 49% of one, 49% of the other, and everyone's just arguing over those middle 2%, the middle 2% of undecideds. Which, as a side note, I don't get how you can be undecided at this point. You know who you're getting. But RFK Jr. I think is a really good um, it's a very big boost, I think, for the Trump camp because what it shows is that he can unify. Is that one of my biggest complaints? And I'm no Trump sycophant by any means. I've got my real qualms with the guy, um, but one of the things that it shows having RFK Jr. Stand in his corner is that it signals to a lot of people who were RFK Jr. fans for things like for environmental issues, for health issues, for government accountability issues. Those are things that a lot of people put a lot of weight in and they were really passionate about, and that's why they were so for RFK Jr. But now Trump taking him into his camp and at least into his advisory, an advisory role, what it shows is that he is willing to take on different ideas, different thoughts, and different points of view, and at least consider them and have them in his inner circle, which is really, it really says a lot, because whenever you talk to, or whenever you look at the other side, when you look at the left, and anyone who's a Democrat at this point, I would say, or at least on the left, would be honest whenever they say that any disagreement or disagreement, or the moment you step out of lockstep with the Democrat leftist agenda, you become labeled as right wing, because the left, as it stands right now, does not support freedom of thought. I mean, there's really no freedom of thought. That's why on the right you get things like Tulsi Gabbard, who is a former Democrat, who her views on foreign policy are wildly different than Donald Trump's. But she has also thrown her weight in behind him, again, signaling that he's willing to have different points of view and take in other parts of the American electorate and say, I hear your voice and it's a little bit different than mine. Like you have a different stance on this. I have a different stance on this, but at least I'm willing to at least have you in the room so we can have these conversations. And I think that resonates with a lot of people, because what we're seeing on the Kamala Harris side is that, like a same thing with California, they only know how to go one direction, or on one direction. That ratchet strap only goes one way. So they're doubling down on the anti-Israel, pro-Palestine issues. They're doubling down on the pro-abortion issues. I think we'll talk about later. But they're moving farther to the left. And Jordan Peterson, who he is a kind of a controversial figure in the evangelical circles, but I really respect Jordan Peterson. And one of his big questions that I think is a fascinating question is, when does the left go too far? And so far, we don't really know. Like, you can't be far enough leftist. The things that you say, I mean, the how far left the LGBTQ issues can go, like how depraved can you go? And before they will actually call out their own issues. And you've never found that limiting factor. You know what I mean? You've never found, when it comes to abortion, LGBTQ, immigration, um, uh, economic issues that are so close to socialism. It's like a rose by any other name, right? And they have yet to find that line where they will say, hey, you know what, time out, guys, flag on the play. That's too far. They haven't found that yet. And so that's, I think, where Kamala Harris is the media right now is the Praetorian Guard for her. Which, if I'm a Democrat, and I'm an intellectually honest Democrat, I'm looking at Donald Trump doing all these interviews. He's doing, like, the interview with Theo Vaughn, which was absolutely hilarious. If you haven't had a chance to watch the interview, it's hilarious. You forget that the guy was in show business before he was, the leader of the free world. But he's doing all kinds of interviews. He's went on to uh, the Black Journalism Association. He's done all kinds of these different interviews, lots of different folks, and he's walked into the lion's den willingly, over and over. And Kamala Harris, who is wanting to be the next president of the United States, will not take an honest interview. She will not go one on one, even to the point right now, which her first interview, she's bringing Tim Walz with her. She still won't. She still won't do a one-on-one interview. And so, and I haven't checked in the last 3 days, to be quite fair. But if the last time I checked, which was about a week ago, if you actually went to her website, there are still, and maybe you can throw a screenshot up on, in post production, but there are still no policies on her website. At least there weren't a week ago. Virtually none. So if you go to the Trump 2024 page, I think one of the far left tabs just says policy positions, and then you drop it all the way down. They're all right there, black and white. But Kamala Harris's website, there is none. And I didn't believe it at first. Someone had said, yeah, there's just nothing on her website about policies. And I said, that's crazy. There's no way. That has to be hyperbolic. So I went and checked for myself, which is something that I try to do as much as I can. Is when someone makes an outrageous claim, I always try to go check it out, because sometimes I've heard outrageous claims be easily debunked by a quick Google search. So I just go check it out. And sure as heck, it was right. There wasn't a single policy on her page, which, if I'm a Democrat, that should be very concerning for every American. And I believe what the issue is that since she was the attorney general in California to a senator to the vice president, she has flip flopped her positions so frequently that if she put a hard stance up, it would, I mean, that campaign commercial would basically make itself. because then they would all they'd have to do is put her arguing against her. And I've actually seen that campaign commercial. I think Trump put one out just like that, where it's policy A, policy B, and it's just her arguing against herself. So, um, I think the media is making sure that they don't really see, or the American people, the American left at least, and independents don't see the real Kamala. And it's happy, it's joy, everything's great. And one of the things that really bothers me and it gets under my skin and it makes me feel kind of gross. It gives me the heebie-jeebies really is the Mamala thing. And Tim, like they call him like Uncle Tim or like or Papa Tim or something weird like that. Like they have ascribed paternal and maternal names to Kamala and Tim Walz and Doug Emhoff, which is Kamala's husband. Um, and it gives this really weird familial vibe that the government is not supposed to be your family member. Like it's a very old socialistic thing is to make the government, the state, your family. The state is your family. Kamala is your mom. Doug Emhoff, Tim Waltz is your uncle. This is your family, not that family over there. Not your biological family. The state is your family. Say, which is an old thing that goes back to the late 1800s. So that gives me weird vibes too. So I think between the two of them, you still don't know who Kamala Harris is. I mean, you do from, if you actually dig down deep in old interviews, but you know who Trump is because he gets on TV all the time and is doing interviews and, he's out there. And so, yeah, that's my take on those two.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like RFK, I wasn't the biggest. I mean, I'm still not the biggest fan of him because he's been a lifelong Democrat, and I think it was what's his name, Dan Bongino. He said something
Hmm.
like, "When a lifelong Democrat from a historic Democrat family tells you you shouldn't vote Democrat, maybe you should listen." And I was like,
Yeah.
"That's a really good point." But what I do like is, the dude is old and he is jacked. I'm sure he's on like TRT, but there's like those videos of him like working out in his jeans, shirtless,
Yep.
and I'm like, okay, this is a guy that actually cares about his health, as opposed to everybody else
Hmm.
lectures about health that's doesn't look like that. I'll just say
Yeah.
that to be nice. But
Hmm.
and going to Trump too, like you're saying, hitting the interviews, I think I saw today that Lex Friedman said he's got Trump scheduled for his podcast. And
That'd be
Lex
good.
Friedman's a pretty, on the fence, tries to say he's not conservative or liberal type of guy. But I think that'll be a good one. I'm still waiting to see if Trump will get on Joe Rogan, as a UFC
How
fan
good's the
who,
internet?
I mean, I get to see Trump. He attends like every single pay-per-view event, like the big ones, which is
Yeah.
really cool because in the crowd, everybody is like shouting when he walks in, with Dana White and whatnot. But yeah, I mean it's just weird, man. I saw I think Benny Johnson going around and asking people like, what have you liked that Kamala's done these past 4 years that you're going to like is making you to like want to vote for her this time around? They're like, I don't know. She's a woman, she's black. Like there's no real reason to vote for her other than she's not Trump. She's a Democrat and she's a woman and she's black. Like,
Yeah.
you know. So, I think they're trying to play up the faith thing too, and I'm not gonna sit here and say that Trump is, this solid example of a Christian man. Maybe he's searching, I don't know. But, as far as Kamala, like, has she historically ever been a part of any kind of church or claimed to be anything?
If she has, it hasn't really. I haven't heard of it. If she has, it hasn't played a big part in what I've seen. So it's not that I've seen. I'll just say that. I try to intake a lot of news. Sometimes to my detriment. Sometimes I need to just turn it off. But not from what I've seen. No.
And, like, that's gonna lead me into, like, my next question was, like, did you see recently that, group and they did, like, a little, like, panel call? It was, Evangelicals for Harris. I mean,
Yeah.
I honestly just thought that was laughable, at this point.
Yeah. Well, I'm honestly at this point, it's the same kind of issue as Queers for Palestine, right? You just don't. What that really tells me is that you don't understand either of the things you're talking about, right? I mean, so if you're evangelical, awesome. But that's a segue. I don't know if we may talk about Christians and Democrats later, but it's the exact same thing as Queers for Palestine. You are supporting a thing that does not support you at all. I mean, and to say that they don't support you is an understatement. They hate you. They despise you. If you are that thing, truly, they hate you, which means that you don't understand who you're supporting, which means that you don't haven't done your homework, which means that you probably should go up there, read another book, watch some more interviews, don't, get off of your social media, which I think that we all fall prey to some extent. Even myself. I mean, I've fallen victim to it as well, which is, the algorithm will get you. The algorithm knows what you interact with, and so it feeds you more of that similar type of content. So before you know it, if I'm a Trump fan, all I see is Trump positive stuff on my social media. So I go, well, I guess the whole world thinks the way I do, and so people need to be careful of that. But evangelicals for Harris is the equivalent of queers for Palestine, because I don't think you can be an evangelical and support Kamala Harris.
Yeah, that was
And if
gonna
you
be
hear
my
that,
next
that's my cat
question
yelling at
was,
me.
can you be a Christian and vote Democrat, you know?
So, I mean, there's the technical answer, which is yes. As an American, you have the right to vote for whoever you want to, and I think that is the correct thing. Obviously, I wouldn't change that. That I wouldn't change that system at all. But I think that if you are voting for Democrats and you believe you are a Christian, you need to reevaluate both of those things, because those two things are incongruent. Those two things, as the Democrat Party currently stands, those two things cannot coexist. Because if you're a Christian and you are supporting the current Democrat Party, you have to really understand what you're supporting. You are supporting the unabashed support of abortion. You are supporting LGBTQ issues as far as the eye can see. And that includes everything from gay, trans, furries. I mean, as far as the eye can see, as far as that rainbow goes, that's what you're supporting if you are supporting the Democrat Party. If you are supporting things like we talked about earlier in California, which is giving money to illegal aliens from the taxpayers to give to something that they don't support, which is by any other name, that's theft, right? And so you're supporting those things. And if you're supporting those things and you are a Christian, I don't see how those two things coexist. If I probably wouldn't have said that 50 years ago. I think that the Democrat Party of maybe the 60s was different. I wasn't alive back then, but from what I've heard, the Democrat Party has drastically changed, and has gone so far left over the last 20 years that it's unrecognizable. But if you believe in the sanctity of life, and if you then you don't agree with Democrats on abortion. If you believe that, as it says in Genesis, that God made them man and woman, then you don't believe in a huge portion of the LGBTQ doctrine. If you believe that homosexuality is a sin, then you don't agree with huge portions, I mean, pillars of the Democrat Party doctrine. Now, I think that's obviously incumbent upon us on Christians to make sure that we say it's not just homosexuality, it's all types of sexual sin, it's all types of sin outlined in the Bible. It's not, we don't single that one out. But for whatever reason, the Democrat Party has selected that sin to elevate to the point of pride. I mean, they're not finding, they're not picking any one of the other, 10 commandments and then, elevating that one, or we call that one out too. Say, you know what, theft, if theft became a point of their, you know, party doctrine, we'd say, hey, you can't celebrate theft. That's someone else's stuff. That's a
Well, they
sin.
actually do that because I think here in California, right, that people can steal from a store as long as it's, like, under 250 bucks or something like that.
900, it's
But
$900, dude.
900.
And no, I know in San Francisco, they have signs, $900 and below. And they're not going to stop you.
And
So
that's
yeah, yeah,
encouraging
you're
theft.
right.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's encouraging theft. So um yeah, if you support, and if you know and if you're comfortable in your faith, and this is the thing that we hear so much in church, and we hear from the pulpit, and we hear and we read in the Bible, is that if you follow Christ and if you pick up your cross daily, you will not be a friend of the world. The world's going to hate you. You know, they martyred every one of the apostles. They killed every single one of them because they were on the side of Christ. And so I think that it's taken, like I said, kind of at the beginning of our chat, that, for the last 6 decades, we have tried to separate ourselves because we thought that it would turn people away from Christ. If we said, you know what, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that, because the other side has weaponized empathy, our empathy, against us, to think that it's something that we shouldn't do. So that it feels like if I say, hey, you know what, you should not do that because that's wrong. And then they say, well, why is that wrong? Well, because objectively, the Bible says, because Christ says, because we have an authority that is objective, and it says that that's wrong. So that's my gauge on what objective morality is. And it supersedes everything, which I'm sure the government just loves, right? Um, so kind of going back to your main question about, can Christians be Democrats and can Democrats be Christians? Currently, as it stands, I would say emphatically no. They are just too, there's too much contradiction between the two of them. And if you are trying to do mental gymnastics to try to make or try to get that round peg into that square hole, you really, that in and of itself needs to be some require some introspection. It shouldn't be that hard, um, to try to get those things to fit. And so,
Yeah, and I see people saying, "Well, they're the party of, like, justice, and that's, caring for the poor and things like that." Well, I mean, how's that working out? It's not. Like, it really isn't. Like, the
yeah,
poor are getting poorer, the homeless population's increasing. We've seen tons and tons of just violence, especially in this state, of California. I mean, in the Bay Area alone, I think there's like stores closing like crazy because they're just not able to sustain a business out there. It's just constant looting and constant just like violent crimes happening where they're just moving out, you know?
yeah,
Is it really the party of justice? Like, and caring for like the poor? It's really not.
yeah. And I think you bring up such a good point because, faith aside, how many times are you going to continue voting for people when they give you the same bad results? This, it's easy for Kamala Harris to try to separate herself from her disastrous party, but she has left behind her a trail of destruction. There's no way to look at that. You go back to San Francisco and say, how's San Francisco doing? It's not doing great. How's the state of California doing? Like, it's just not doing great. People are leaving in record numbers. The inflation is through the roof. Illegal immigration is through. Like, it's having a tough time. And she has been an integral part of that. She's been an integral part of the democratic machine that has facilitated a lot of that destruction. And now she's trying to bring that to the White House and trying to say, "Oh no, that wasn't me. I had no part in that." And that's why sometimes people have to look at that and go, well, wait a minute. You did have a part in that. You had a huge part in that. What could we talk about that? But the moment you do what I just did, that last 5 seconds of, well, actually, you were kind of a part of that. Now you've moved out of lockstep. Now you've had that first step of free thought, and now you're danger close to a red pill, because that question, the moment, and this was my political awakening when I was in my early 20s too, because I don't know if you know this, Aaron, but like I think I've talked about this before, but I used to be a fairly rabid socialist. I was a wannabe socialist revolutionary. I bought the thing hook, line, and sinker. I read every part of every bit of socialist, doctrine, propaganda I could get my hands on, until it just started to not make sense. And the first time along my path of, moving away from that type of ideology, was just the question. It was the question of, well, wait a minute, you were a senator, you were a Democratic senator from California. You were the attorney general for California. And during your time, it didn't do well. Let's talk about that. But the moment you answer that question, there's a crack in the dam. The moment you answer that question or ask the question, there's a crack. And then eventually enough little cracks happen and then the dam breaks. That's why the Democrat Party, leftists and liberals, they hate even asking questions because the moment you ask a question, you're danger close to having a self really, a self actualizing moment, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and I think I've shared with you too, like, I grew up pretty conservative, in a conservative church, conservative family, but there was a while there in my, 20s where, like, the group I was hanging out with, they were just a little more on the liberal side, and
Hmm.
especially
Hmm.
around, like, the Trump era, it was like, "Oh, he's racist," this and that, and I kinda, like, was, like, uneducated on it, to be honest, so I kinda just, like, believed it, and then I remember talking to my little brother, and I bring this up all the time, where we were, like, talking in a group chat or something with my cousin. I was like, "Well, he called, like, Mexicans animals or something like that," and he's like, "No, he didn't." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Everybody's saying that he said that," And they're like, "No, he didn't. He talked about, like, the cartels and the drug dealers and stuff like that, not just generally Mexican people or Hispanic people." And I was like, "What?" So I Googled it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, what in the world?" And then you just kinda, like, realize that you're being, like, lied to, you know? You
Yeah. Well,
realize
and sorry.
that, like, it's like propaganda, like, and I don't think it's intentional by some of the people around you. I think they're just repeating what they're being told, you know?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, and it's funny you said that because I'm sure that whenever you were, having that discussion, where you had heard that comment from, the person who told it to you was so convinced, right? You're like, they are convincing because they are convinced. They believe this whole cloth. You know what I mean? Like they fully believe what they're telling you. And I had a similar situation when I was in high school. And this was, like I said, this was well into my, uh, my wannabe socialist days. I had a history teacher. I lived out in Arizona for a little bit when I was in high school with my dad. My dad was a border patrol agent, and this history teacher told me that out there near Nogales, Arizona, there's a checkpoint. It's 50 miles north of the border, similar to San Diego, where there's that checkpoint kind of just north of San Ysidro, I think. There's a checkpoint right there. And this history teacher goes, that checkpoint's illegal. You cannot have that checkpoint there. That checkpoint is unconstitutional. And I'm sitting there, a little want to rage against the machine, Brian, and I'm going, yeah, it's absolutely illegal. Yeah, you know what you're talking about, history teacher. And so I marched right into my house and I said, Dad, that checkpoint you guys are running, it's illegal. It is unconstitutional. You can't have that there. And he looks at me for a second. He goes, what? I said, you can't have that there. My history teacher told me so. And he goes over and he their little border patrol book, goes over to the United States Code, and I'll remember off the top of my head, but he pulled out and he listed off the legislation. He showed it to me. He said, no, it is completely legal. It's allowed to be there. Of course it's allowed to be there. Yes, we can have a checkpoint there. The guy was so convincing because he was so convinced. You know what I mean? He was so sure of himself. And if you're moderately uneducated and you're just taking in a lot of information about things you don't know, of course you fall victim to that. You know what I mean? Of course you go, well, yeah, he's got to be right. Look how convinced he is. But he was so convinced and how wrong he was, and he didn't know it. And that was one of the first times that I have in my memory of going, what if, and this is leftist taboo. What if they're wrong? What if I'm wrong? What if he's telling me is inaccurate? And he obviously he was. And then so after that, it's the questions started to come a little easier, which is, do you actually know what you're talking about? And is this accurate? And are you right? And so, no, like you said, that, like you're there, it's easy to fall victim to how convinced someone can be and how wrong they are.
It really is, and then, like, the whole just narrative starts, like, unraveling in your head, like, Trump's racist, and then you, like, see him, like, hanging out with Herschel Walker, and you're like, "I don't know a lot of racist
He's not a
people, but,
he's
like,
not a very good racist.
they're not very good if they're, like, hanging out with, like, black people," like, and so,
Yeah.
like, yeah, and then you see, like, all the Mexicans for Trump, like, Hispanics for Trump, and I'm like, "Wait a second," like, these people all, like, love him, and they're supporting him, and he's supporting them, it's like, it doesn't make any sense, and then you're like, "Wait, I think they lied about everything," and then you start
Yeah,
reading
because
up,
once
on, like, failed policies and stuff, and you're kinda like, "Whoa," like, and then now you're, like, in this time, where you're like, it was way better during the Trump era, like, no wars, the economy was a lot better. And now it's just kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, let's not repeat the same mistake, people.
Yeah, well, and one thing that is infuriating to me, and I can't be alone in this, is whenever I've had discussions online, unfortunately, which I know that most, online arguments usually end well. But I've had this discussion with people and I go, objectively, things are worse now. Right? They are. I mean, to me, they're objectively worse because I have eyes to see and ears to hear that things are not going as well as they are now than when Trump was in office. Things are more expensive. But then I will get some snarky leftist, to come on and go, well, actually, the inflation is better. You're not paying as much as you were back then. Things are better. And then I'm going, are you are you taking crazy pills? Like, of course things are more expensive now. Like, you're not gonna gaslight me into convincing me that I wasn't alive 4 years ago. Like, I remember that. I'm a grown up. I have memory that is beyond the last election cycle. So whenever they say, "Oh, things are better now under Biden," I go, "Under what metric are you trying to use to gauge that?" Because under every measurable thing that I can see, it's worse. Everything's more expensive. We are so close to a third world war. It's not even funny. Unbelievable amounts of illegal immigration. Um, there's just a general mistrust of everything government. The country is more divided now than I think it's been since the Civil War. I mean, we are in crazy times, and like someone had pointed out over during the DNC, which is Democrats have had the presidency for the last 12 of the last 16 years. At some point, you have to say, yep, it's us. When the Democrats run every major city, they own whole parts of the governmental levers of power. You can't just blame it on the other guy. And eventually, as citizens, as responsible citizens, we need to say, put party aside and go, you know what? These guys are not doing a good job. And I've talked with Cassie about this, which is, there's this really, there's a big push right now that says everyone get out there and vote, get out there and vote. Everybody should vote. And I do believe that everybody should vote. But if you are going to use your vote frivolously, or if you are going to be irresponsible with your vote, I don't think you should vote at all. And I know that may be a controversial thing to say, but I don't think everybody should vote. I think that if you don't know what's going on, a misinformed vote on both sides is probably is a very dangerous thing to do. Having these rights in these responsibilities as citizens is something that I think a lot of people just kind of take for granted. But when we talk about the Second Amendment, when we talk about responsible gun ownership, you ask like, what does responsible gun ownership look like? Well, I know all the fundamentals of marksmanship. I go to the range. I practice. I practice my trigger squeak, my trigger discipline. I know it's behind my target. I go through all these mental exercises to make sure that if God forbid I ever have to use that weapon, I'm using it responsibly. I've trained for it, I've practiced for it. But there's virtually no effort like that when you talk about voting, despite the fact that a vote can affect an infinite more number of people than a single bullet can. The difference is with a bullet, you see the damage right away. But with the ballot, you pull that trigger and it just goes off into the ether, and you never know how bad the damage is you've caused by an irresponsible or uninformed vote. So I would encourage everybody, if you don't really know, and like I said, both sides, if you don't know what you're voting for or who you're voting for, and if you can't give one good reason why you're going to vote for that person, maybe just wait off. Or I also think that just a vote against the other person, I think that's irresponsible also. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
crazy
no,
times,
no,
man.
that's a really good point. So a question I wanted to ask, going back to just the two parties, and so historically, Christians have aligned with the Republican Party because the more conservative values and policies. One of the biggest ones has been abortion and the pro-life issue. Trump has, in this election season, been a little more softer on it, I guess is the best word. I think in Arizona, he kind of scolded them a bit, so they went too far on their abortion ban or something. I think you would know
Mhm.
more about that. And then also, I think Vance recently said like if a national abortion ban came to Trump's desk, he would veto it. I think they're basically saying leaving it up to the states. So a lot of Christians are saying, well, there you go, like Trump lost my vote. I'm just going to go ahead and vote third party, which could honestly just be a waste. You know, how are Christians supposed to navigate this? You don't want to let like the Democratic side win again, because they are very pro-abortion and they're not shy about it. I mean, every time there's a speech, it's women's reproductive rights. And at the DNC, they had like abortion trucks, like they're freaking food trucks, which is disgusting and vile.
It's horrible.
Um, yeah, so but if the Republican side now is being not as pro-life, like how are Christians supposed to navigate this?
So I think one of the things that one of the things that has happened in my mind is I get hyper focused on the federal government. And when our country was founded, it was never supposed to be like that. The president was never supposed to have such a direct impact on our lives. The founders would have just really been appalled to see how influential and powerful the executive branch has become. So one of the things I would say to Christians who are really struggling with that, and it's a good struggle. I mean, I understand, um, is that if the abortion uh, is your cause, don't vote not for Trump simply because of that. Because one of the things he did was he did give it back to the states, or he gave it to he chose the Supreme Court. Supreme Court gave it back to where it should be, or depending on how you stand. But he gave it back to the states, which is a move in the right direction. And if that's your cause, don't throw Trump out with the bathwater. It was a bad example, but uh, move local, pull your efforts back, and if that's your cause, petition your state representatives to stop funding Planned Parenthood. Go to your churches and say, hey, maybe we can have a prayer vigil um, outside of our local Planned Parenthood. How can I support in my local pregnancy resources center? There are a lot of other ways locally that we as Christians can fight the abortion machine instead of just looking at, the federal government to say, fix my problem. So what I would say is that, if that's your cause, there's a lot of other ways. I disagree with Trump on the abortion issue. Got it. I someday I cannot wait for the day that abortion is just like slavery. It's just gone. It's a horrible miscarriage of justice left in the past, and we can look back on it. But until then, I don't agree with Trump on his abortion issue. But I agree with him on his financial issues. I agree with him on his foreign policy issues. I agree with him on his immigration issues. I agree with him that he loves America, which is a really good thing. That should be a prerequisite, for people in government, is that they should love America. And so for those things, I'm still going to vote for him. But if abortion is my cause, then I'm going to come back to my church and I'm going to, go get with my church, say, how can we support moms in need? Or how can I go pray for people thinking about abortions? How can I capture them? How can we do it as a church? I don't want to abdicate my responsibility to this other person who's hurting to the federal government, which is the exact same thing as forced charity through taxes. It's like that's not the way. I don't think that's the way it was intended. It wasn't intended for the government to take my money and then give it away and say, "Oh, look, Brian, you're being charitable," and then go, "Okay, well, I guess I've done my due, my good deed." I don't think that was the intent of it. To help the widow, help the orphans, and to help the poor in your community. It was us as a church. It was up to me as an individual to reach out and help those people. So I think to Christians who are struggling with that issue, I think that there is a much more local way that we can support. And if you think about every one of those churches, if all of God's people, if all of the churches in America just reached out to their communities to see how they could support these people, that would have a completely blanketing effect across the United States of America. We wouldn't need the federal government to do anything for us because we would be helping to forward that message of love and that protection of life for for the unborn, for God's children. And so, and I think that's a I think we tend to conflate those two things. You know, what is the government going to do for us versus what am I supposed to be doing for us? What is my responsibility to my neighbor? You know, so yeah, think local.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that we have also, gone so far extreme in the other way when, like, Roe v. Wade was, in effect still, and, like you pointed out, Trump appointed, the Supreme Court justices that did away with that and gave it back to the state, and so I think now there's gonna be a little bit of struggle going like, turning this back around. I think, no one likes to use the language of like lesser of two evils, but Trump and the like Republican vote is the lesser of the two evils here. I mean, it really is because the Democratic Party is just not shy, like I mentioned earlier about this. If you have a freaking abortion truck at your at the DNC, this is just yeah, it is evil on display, and they were being used. I mean, this isn't like they were just out
You've
there
moved
for
well
like
past safe, legal, and rare, right? You have completely given up that charade of safe, legal, and rare. So yeah, whenever you have the abortion food truck out front, and then the all the random like the people in abortion pills dancing around. I don't know if you saw pictures of that like in the parade, but it's a weird idolatrous love of this sacrifice of the unborn. And like I don't know how else to put it, you know. And so like I said, if you're a Christian and you're supporting Democrats, like that's what you're supporting. There's no way you can't divorce those two things. That is a huge tenet of current Democrat Party ideology is the complete adoration for abortions. And you can't separate those two things. And I know that that puts people in a weird situation because now they're forced to reconcile their faith with this truth in front of them. So it's tough, man.
yeah, no, absolutely. And so, yeah, I really do think, I mean, we're here voting for a president. We're not voting for like a new pastor or something. Like,
Hmm.
everyone, and this is like the argument coming from the left. Like, he's not even a Christian. We get that, but this is, the better option here. It is the less evil option. And people try to say like sin is sin, it's all equal. Yeah, it's all equally offensive to God, but like there are sins that are more evil, you know.
Yeah, I
Like
believe that. Yeah, yeah,
that's why we have language in the Bible for like abominations, There's like evil and then there's like abominations. Like there's are things that are just like, you know, they affect more people and there's more consequences to them, you know.
yeah,
There's
absolutely.
a
Yeah,
diff
yeah.
like Jesus said, like hating your brother is like equal to murder, right? Like yeah, the
Hmm.
sin itself, but if you actually murder somebody as opposed to like hating and apologizing, like the actual murder is a lot worse, So we gotta stop treating it like it's like,
Yeah,
like you're about to do like 25 to life for hating your brother. Like you're not. Like that person is still here.
that's a
You
great way to
didn't take
look at that.
somebody's
Yeah,
like father from them, like there are degrees of sin here. Like and
yeah,
everybody knows
yeah,
this except for some of the more uneducated ones. But if you're studying church doctrines and stuff like that, you know that it's like, yeah, there's different degrees. So all that to say, I really do think it is a better option, to vote for Trump in this and Republican. And this is coming from you too, right? Who you wanted DeSantis originally, right? Like you didn't even want
I
Trump
was a
in there.
huge, I am a huge DeSantis fan. I think that he'll make an amazing president. That's my hope. So yeah, no, like I said from the beginning, I mean, even whenever Trump ran in 2016, I was a Ben Carson fan, and then I was a Ted Cruz fan, and then by default I was a Trump fan. And he did much better than really I thought he would. You know, for being honest, he did a lot better than I thought he would. I was happy with a lot of things that he did. And so whenever it kind of comes down to that man on the street thing, well, what are your favorite things that he's done? You know, it's like, well, it was easy. I could say the economy was good. He went toe to toe with all the dictators and he prevented war during that time. He moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in Israel, which I thought was a fantastic move. So yeah, he made a concrete step towards stopping illegal immigration. He let the Border Patrol agents and the Department of Homeland Security do their job, and he started making efforts to actually build a wall, which is a good thing. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of tangible things that he did that I think would make him another really good president. But there are a lot of things about him that I don't like. But like I said, I'm not electing a pastor like you said. I'm not trying to find my moral exemplar in the guy. I need someone who's going to make this country um, worth living in, safe to live in, a place for me to prosper, for you to prosper, for our kids to grow up in safety and have good economic prospects. Like that's what we're looking for. I want to go to church without the possibility of it, being bulldozed while I'm inside it. Things like that. So,
Absolutely. All right, man. Well, that's pretty much all I had for the questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to say before we go?
um, the only thing I would say to your listeners, which would be, don't be afraid to start exercising your rights as a Christian and in your day-to-day life, to include work, to include um, politics. There's an effort right now. We have a couple local pastors who just became members of the school board. They actually started running for office, and I think that's a really good thing. Whenever you see like pronouns and bios, I know that a lot of Christians are like, maybe they don't recognize that once you put your pronouns in your bio, that you are now implicitly playing a game that you didn't realize you were playing in the first place. Can an act of worldwide civil disobedience be something to be like, I'm just not going to put anything in that intentionally. I'm not going to put it because I'm not going to play that game. So I would encourage people that, you don't necessarily have to run for office. You don't have to do anything crazy as Christians, but I would say, how can we not separate those two worlds? How can I incorporate my Christian values into every little thing? How can I let it permeate all of what I do? And so I would just encourage people, live that, uh, let the light shine, just ask for braveness to proclaim your faith and just stand up against the world whenever the world is pushing. Don't be afraid to stand firm and realize there's a whole bunch of people out there, and you have, the most important person in the universe, which is the creator, on your side. So, and just know that, like you said before, if the world hates you, know that it hated me first. And so I think that's a pretty good lens to look at the world through whenever we're going through, especially in these times, going, if I stand up for what Christ said, people are not going to like me. I'm not going to be popular. And so I think going into it with that mindset, I think is really, really important. And then we'll let the Lord take care of the rest. We're just called to be obedient.
Amen. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and yeah, and hope you enjoy Tennessee. And
Yeah. Thanks, man. Anytime you
um,
want to come, you want to get me on to stir up the hornet's nest, brother. I'm always willing to.
absolutely, man. I've only ever been to Nashville, so I'd love to see other parts of it.
Hey,
So
anytime you want to come out to Eastern Tennessee, I would just offer you a word of caution. Once you come out here, you're not going to want to go back, homie.
I've heard that from a lot of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, man.